In today's video, I'm going to do a walkthrough of the writing section from SAT Practice Test 6. I've scored perfectly on back-to-back SAT writing sections, and as I go through this practice test, I'm going to show you the most efficient way to answer each and every question, and I'll also give you some tips, tricks, and grammar rules that you need to know for the SAT writing section along the way. So with all that being said, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's go ahead and get started with the first passage. So we have a necessary resource for science. In the winter of 1968, scientists David Schindler and Greg Brunskill poured nitrates and phosphates into Lake 227. And then we have, this is one of the 58 water bodies that compose Canada's remotely located experimental lakes area. Now what we need to recognize here is that if we're going to include this is, then what's after this comma becomes an independent clause. We also know that what's before the comma is also an independent clause. We can't connect two independent clauses with only a comma and not one of the fanboys, so we know answer choice A will be wrong. Now if we take a look at answer choices C and answer choices B, if we were to take out this is and we were to put in which is one or just one, then we're going to end up with a dependent clause. Okay, we can't connect an independent clause to a dependent clause with a period, okay, because then we have a dependent clause as a standalone sentence, which isn't possible. It has to be an independent clause. Therefore, we know our answer is going to be D. What we do is we take out this is, we keep that comma after 227, and then we have the A positive that's describing Lake 227 as one of the 58 freshwater bodies that compose Canada's remotely located experimental lakes area. All right, moving on. We have Schindler and Brunskill were contaminating the water not out of malice, but in the name of research. While deliberately adding chemical compounds to a lake may seem destructive and irresponsible, we know that that right there is going to be a dependent clause. After a dependent clause, when it's at the start of our sentence, we want to have a comma, so we're going to want to have a comma there. So if we take a look at our answer choices, we see answer choices B. They have an unnecessary comma between destructive and irresponsible. Same thing in C, so we can get rid of both of those. And then taking a look at answer choice D, we have a comma in the wrong place. The end of our dependent clause is after irresponsible, so we have to have a comma there. So our answer there will be A, no change. All right, let's go ahead and keep reading. This method of experimenting is sometimes the most effective way to influence policy and save the environment from even more damaging pollution. Schindler and Brunskill were investigating possible causes for the large blooms of blue-green algae or cyanobacteria that had been affecting bodies of water such as Lake Erie. Now we're asked to combine the underlined sentences. So whenever combining underlined sentences, what we want to do is we want to start with the answer choice that's the shortest because that's the most likely to be concise, efficient, not redundant, and not repetitive. So let's go ahead and do that. So we have, in addition to being unsightly and odorous, so that's an introductory modifying phrase, modifying these algal blooms, so that's good so far, cause oxygen depletion, which kills fish and other wildlife in the lakes. All right, so that's grammatically correct. It's not repetitive, it's not redundant, it's efficient, it's concise. So that's going to be our correct answer. I will show you why A, B, and C are incorrect though right here. So let's go ahead and take a look at A. In addition to being unsightly and odorous, these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion, the result being that it kills fish and other wildlife in lakes. The big issue here is that when we say the result being, that's really wordy, and we can make that much more concise. Okay, so that's why A is going to be incorrect there. If we take a look at B, we have in addition to being unsightly and odorous, these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion. These algal blooms, the algal blooms cause oxygen depletion. See, we're repeating that same really, part of our sentence twice there. We say these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion, and then we say the algal blooms cause oxygen depletion again. We're being repetitive, being redundant. C, in addition to being unsightly and odorous, these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion and oxygen depletion. We don't want to repeat a subject like that twice if we don't have to, and we don't have to as we see in answer choice D. So that's why C would be incorrect there. All right, let's keep going. Just weeks after the scientists added the nitrates and phosphates, the water in Lake 227 turned bright green. Then we have, it was thick with the same type of algal blooms that had plagued Lake Erie. We see all of our words are the same, we just have variances in punctuation. So we got to break down what's an independent clause here and what's not. So we have, just weeks after the scientists added the nitrates and phosphates, that's a dependent clause, introducing our independent clause. Then we have the independent clause of the water in Lake 227 turned bright green. Okay, after that we have, it was thick with the same type of algal blooms that had plagued Lake Erie. Now if we ignore this colon right here, we see we have an independent clause in this underlined portion, okay? So if we're going to connect these two independent clauses, we've got a couple of options. Okay, we can't just use a comma, so we can get rid of D. We could use a period, but the issue with answer choice C is that we then have an M dash where we can't have an M dash. We can't split up with and the same type of algal blooms. Those have to be together with no punctuation between them. Okay, so like I just said, there can't be punctuation between with and thus. We can also get rid of answer choice A, and our answer choice will be B then. We use that colon to correctly connect these two independent clauses, where the second is illustrating that point made in the first independent clause. All right, moving on now, we've got question number 5. So which choice provides the best transition to from our previous paragraph to this one? Well, we have to know what this paragraph is talking about first to answer that. So if the scientists divided the lake in half by placing a nylon barrier through the narrowest part of its 8-figure shape. In one half of Lake 226, they added phosphates, nitrates, and a source of carbon. And the other, they added just nitrates, and a source of carbon was added. Well, we already know that they added it, so we can get rid of any answer choice that has added there in 6. Okay, so we can get rid of something with also, okay, because we have the word and, so we don't need also there as well. I suppose that we don't have and in C and D, but We see that if we were to say plus also, saying plus and also, that's redundant. Okay, saying but also adding, okay, also and adding. We already said adding, we don't need to say adding again. And then we take a look at answer choices B and A. A had adding twice there, so our answer there will be B. B is concise, it's not redundant, it's not repetitive. All right, now we go ahead and keep reading. We have Schindler and Brunskill hypothesized the phosphates were responsible for the growth of cyanobacteria. So as we can see here, the big thing that we have going on is that it looks like we are potentially shifting from a discussion of, I believe we're talking about Lake 227, yep, in this previous paragraph. Okay, I'll go ahead and highlight that for you in green. We see that we were talking about Lake 227 in our previous paragraph. Now we're transitioning into a discussion of Lake 226. So we need to make sure that we make this transition very clear, because otherwise it could get confusing. Okay, so when we're looking to make this transition in question number 5, we want to look for an answer choice that's talking about Lake 226. So I see we have that in answer choice C. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that says. To isolate the cause of the algae, we know our previous paragraph was discussing the algae. We have Schindler and Brunskill performed another experiment, this time using Lake 226, and we see that throughout this, we're describing that experiment, throughout this paragraph. So that's a perfect transition, because we're transitioning from the discussion of algae in the previous paragraph in Lake 227 to now Lake 226 and talking about the experiment we're doing here. So our answer there would be C. All right, let's go ahead and keep going through it. We already answered 6. We're down here by 7. So we have the experiment confirmed their suspicions when the half of the lake containing the phosphates, and then we'll have was teeming, were teeming, are teeming, or teem. So what we got to keep in mind here is we got to match the subject of our, the number of our subject to the number of our verb, and then also make sure that we have the correct tense here. All right, so let's go ahead and identify our subject. So we have the half of the lake. Now keep in mind we ignore any prepositional phrases when determining the number of our subject. So our subject will be half, which is going to be singular. So we can get rid of any answer choice that has, anything plural. So were teeming, that would be plural. Are teeming also would be plural. And then we're between present tense teams and then the past tense of was teeming, right? That's going to be obviously, I believe, the perfect past tense there, not just simple past tense. But what we also recognize is that this was confirmed, which means it happened not in the present, but in the past. Okay, so we can use that perfect past tense there of answer choice A. We can't use present tense because we know that this happened in the past. All right, now we can go ahead and move on to question number 8. So we have Schindler and Brunskill's findings were shown off by the journal Science. Well, that's not fitting with our tone. Also, it's not really fitting with the meaning, right? If we're going to publish findings, we're going to publish them, like I said, right? If we have findings from some sort of science thing, we're likely to publish them in a journal. We're not going to show them off in a journal. We're not going to put it in the spotlight of a journal. We're going to publish them in a journal, okay? We're not going to put them into a journal either, okay? This right here is dealing with both tone but also meaning. If we have findings, we're going to publish them in a journal of science. All right, the research demonstrated a clear correlation between introducing phosphates and the growth of blue-green algae. Now we're making some sort of transition. Legislators in Canada passed laws banning phosphates in laundry detergents, which had been entering the water supply. All right, so in this case, we see we're not really providing an example, but instead what we're doing is we're describing sort of an outcome, right? We had this research showing a relationship between phosphates and the growth of algae. Now we have an outcome coming after that of Canada passing laws banning those phosphates, okay? Because it's coming after that, we would use subsequently to indicate that it happened after. All right, moving on to question number 10. We're wondering, the writer wants to add a second policy outcome of the research described. Which choice best accomplishes this goal? Keep in mind, if you're ever given a prompt on the SAT writing section, pay close attention to what it's asking you to do. In this case, talking about a second policy outcome. So we have A, Lake 226 continued to develop blooms of blue-green algae for 8 consecutive years after the experiment took place. That's not talking about another policy. B, in the United States, many individual states have also adopted legislation to eliminate or at least reduce phosphorus content in laundry detergents. That's likely going to be my correct answer here because that's talking about a policy outcome, and it is going to be my correct answer, but I also want to show you why C and D are incorrect here as well. So we have in 1974, Schindler initiated a study of the effects of acid rain using Lake 223 to examine how sulfuric acid altered aquatic ecosystems. That's not talking about another policy outcome, so that'll be incorrect. And then D, aerial photos of the lakes taken before and after the algal blooms help convey the effects of phosphates in water to the public. Also not talking about a policy outcome. B is our correct answer. That's the only answer choice that's giving us that policy outcome. All right, moving on to question number 11 now. We have experiments like these can help people understand the unintended consequences of using certain household products. Now we're told which choice most effectively anticipates and addresses a relevant counter-argument to the argument in favor of the types of experiments described in the passage. Keep in mind, we want to pay close attention to this part here. The counter-argument has to be to those who are in favor of the types of experiments described in the passage. That's what the counter-argument has to be to. So we have option A, of course, regulating the certain use of chemical compounds could be an issue. No, we want to focus on that, use of experiments in natural settings. B, many companies now offer phosphate-free alternatives. No, we want to focus once again on the experiments. C, obviously scientists should not be allowed to randomly perform experiments on just any body of water? Yes, that's focusing on the types of experiments as I highlighted in that question. Okay, and then answer choice D, phosphates are sometimes used in agricultural fertilizers. Once again, that's getting away from our prompt there. So our answer there's got to be C. Moving on. Next passage, a little to the left, but not too much. Italy's Tower of Pisa has been leaning southward since the initial stages of its construction. Well, one thing that jumps out to me immediately, this is the wrong it's, okay? Our it's has to be the it's that's without the apostrophe, so we know our answer there has to be D. We know this because it has to show possession of the construction, okay? So we have to show possession, singular, and possessive, thus we have to have its, no apostrophes. All right, moving on, we have over 800 years ago, some transition here. If the tower's construction had not taken 2 centuries and involved significant breaks due to war and civil unrest, which allowed the ground beneath the tower to settle, the tower would likely have collapsed before it was completed. Well, that's showing why it's been leaning for over 800 years since its initial construction. So we have to make sure that we're showing, some sort of indication that we're going to sort of add to that previous sentence. We wouldn't say therefore because it's not causal. We wouldn't say however because we're not contrasting. We wouldn't say nevertheless because that's really not an appropriate transition here. What we want to focus on is adding on and explaining that previous sentence. So we would use the transition indeed there. All right, moving on now, we've got question number 14. Luckily, the tower survived and the tilt has made it an Italian icon. And then we could have either it attracts visitors from all over. We could have attracting. We could have it's attracting, or a semicolon and then attracting. What we got to recognize here that answer choice A we know is going to be wrong because we have an independent clause before this comma and an independent clause after it if we were to include it attracts. So we know that that'll be incorrect because we're only connecting with a comma, no fanboy. Now if we take a look at answer choice C, same thing there. We'd be connecting 2 independent clauses. We'd be connecting 2 independent clauses together with only a comma and not one of the fanboys. So we see C would be wrong there. Next up, we take a look at answer choice D. We have a semicolon, but then we say only attracting, which is a participle, which means that what would come after that comma would be a dependent clause, which we can't connect with that semicolon then. Okay, so what we see here, our answer there is going to be B. What we're going to do is we're going to take a comma, put that at the end of the independent clause, use the participle attracting to then set up this dependent clause of attracting visitors from all over who flock to Pisa to see one of the world's greatest architectural, and then obviously I'll answer 15, in the world. Okay, we see that that's obviously going to be a dependent clause that's modifying icon. We see then we're connecting it with the comma and the participle. Our answer there will be B. All right, now addressing question 15, right? One of the greatest architectural weirdnesses in the world? No, that's not fitting with our tone, and it's also not a good way to describe the Leaning Tower of Pisa. We wouldn't say deviations either. We wouldn't say abnormalities. We would say oddities. That fits our tone. It also provides a correct description of one of the greatest architectural oddities in the world, which is obviously describing that Leaning Tower of Pisa. All right, now we got question 16. At this point, the writer is considering adding the following sentence. Unfortunately, the tower's tilt has steadily increased over the centuries, placing the structure in danger of collapse. Should we make this addition here? We have to read on to figure this out. So we have by the late 20th century, the angle of the tower's tilt had reached an astonishing 5.5 degrees. And then we have in 1990, Italy's government closed the tower to visitors and appointed a committee to find a way to save it. All right, so should we add this here? Yes. Why? Because we're marking a pretty solid transition in the course of our paragraph from really just describing Leaning Tower of Pisa as, one of the oddities in the world to now shifting and talking about an issue where its tilt has been increasing. Okay, so should we make this addition? Yes. Why? Well, we have option A because it provides an important restatement of the main claim. No, because we're transitioning, providing an important shift in the emphasis of the paragraph's discussion about the tower's tilt. All right, question number 7. One thing that we need to recognize immediately with 7. When we have in 1990, that's saying in followed by a year, we have to have a comma after that. So any answer choice without the comma after 1990, we can get rid of. We can get rid of C. We can also get rid of D here. We can also get rid of A and B both have that comma. Okay, so the next thing that we have as a difference between A and B is commas right here, okay, between Italy's government and close. We don't need to have a comma there, so we can get rid of B. Our answer will be A. We only need that comma after 1990, and then we're good to go. The committee was charged with saving the tower without ruining its aesthetic, and now we're asked for which choice best sets up the main point of the paragraph, so we have to read on. The committee's first attempt to reduce the angle of the tower's tilt, placing 600 tons of iron ingots molded piece of metal on the tower's north side to create counterweight, was derided because the bulky weights ruined the tower's appearance. The attempt at a less visible solution, sinking acres into the ground below the tower, almost caused the tower to fall. All right, so what we can ultimately see here is that we have 2 solutions that we tried, but there were issues with ruining the appearance and then also with potentially toppling the tower. So we want to focus on both of those in our answer choice. We have option A, which no one had yet managed to achieve. That's not addressing both of the issues on why they couldn't achieve it. And then B, although not everyone on the committee agreed on what the aesthetic was, that's not the issue here. C, which meant somehow preserving the tower's tilt. Yes, we see that we had problems with that in this, second attempt at a solution, right? Almost causing the tower to fall, while preventing that tilt from increasing and toppling the tower, right? That's ultimately the issue because we have to preserve the tower's tilt, to make sure that we maintain that appearance as discussed in this part I'm highlighting right now. Okay, we can't ruin the appearance. And then also we have to make sure that we don't topple the tower as discussed in this second part of this sort of paragraph here. So our answer is going to have to be answer choice C. If we take a look at D, which included the pristine white marble finish that has come to be widely associated with the tower's beauty, that's focusing way too narrow on the appearance. We also have to address the aspect where we have to make sure that we preserve the tilt but not topple the tower. So our answer there is going to be C. Okay, now we got to go and move on to our next question. So we see I have a 1 here, so I'm going to go to where my question that asked me about placing a sentence is. I see I got to place sentence 5. We have Berland. I don't know who that is yet, so I'll need to place that after some sort of discussion of him. Advocated using soil extraction. We see that'll be our correct answer. Why? Because it's going to be idiomatic. You see, as I read through it, it made perfect sense. Nothing wrong with it. If we take a look at answer choices B and C, if we were to say Berland advocated to use soil extraction or Berland advocated the using of, those are both not idiomatic. If you don't know what idiomatic means, it basically just means what you would naturally say if you were speaking to someone, or what, is the common, English grammatically correct way of saying something. Yeah, if you want to get more practice with that, just keep going through practice tests and you'll get more comfortable with it. If we take a look at question D, advocating to use soil extraction, that would end up leaving us without a main verb in that independent clause there, which means we couldn't have this colon here, so that's why D would be incorrect there. All right, and then going back and focusing in on question or sentence 5 here. So we have Berland advocated using soil extraction. Like I said, I need to have some discussion of Berland before this sentence. And then we have removing small amounts of soil from the tower's north side opposite its tilt to enable gravity to straighten the tower. So we see a description of some sort of potential solution. We could maybe have some sort of elaboration on that in the sentences that follow. All right, so let's go ahead and read through. We have intercommittee member John Berland, so I'm now beginning that discussion of him. And then we have a comma. We see that this is an independent clause, so I'll go ahead and mark that with IC. A geotechnical engineer from England who saved London's clock tower Big Ben from collapse. Anytime that you have a comma like this after someone's name, that should be an indicator to you that you're likely going to have an appositive that's describing that person, or a non-essential phrase or clause describing them. In this case, we see that we can have an appositive. We just delete the underlined portion, right? We don't need to repeat Berland. We don't need to say his. We don't need to say he is. We know who we're talking about. So we can just take out that underlined portion and then have this appositive describing John Berland, of a geotechnological engineer from England who saved London's clock tower Big Ben from collapse. Okay, next I have Berland began a years-long process of drilling out small amounts of soil from under the tower. Well, what is that? That's an illustration, or I'm sorry, a description of ultimately his using soil extraction. Okay, so we want to place sentence 5 then between 1 and 2. So where should we place it? We should place it after sentence 1. Okay, in sentence 2, we begin that discussion of that process that we introduced in sentence 5 there. So Berland began a years-long process of drilling out small amounts of soil from under the tower, and then we have that took several years to complete. We know that it took several years to complete because he says that it's a years-long process, right, in this highlighted portion. Okay, so we can go ahead and remove that underlined portion because it's redundant. So we can delete the underlined portion. We see B, C, and A, they all have that redundancy. All right, moving on to passage number 3. The physician assistant will see you now. Now we have which choice is the best introduction to the paragraph as question number 23. To answer that, we have to read on. So we have, well, the pressures of an aging population, insurance reforms, and health epidemics have increased demand for care. The supply of physicians is not expected to. And then right there we have keep pace, maintain the tempo, get in line, or move along. Our answer there is going to be keep pace because that's matching the correct tone that we have so far in this passage. Also, we see it's going to be a science passage more than likely, fairly academic. We want to make sure we keep that academic tone. Saying get in line, move along, or maintain the tempo, those would all ruin that sort of academic tone, science sort of tone of this passage. So our answer there has to be A. All right, let's keep reading. The Association of American Medical Colleges predicts a shortage of over 90,000 physicians by 2020. By 2025, that number could climb to more than 130,000. In some parts of the country, shortages are already a sad fact of life. A 2009 report by the Bureau of Health Professions notes that although a fifth of the U.S. population serves that population, notes that although a fifth of the U.S. population lives in rural areas, less than a tenth of U.S. physicians serve that population. Because the traditionalist response to the crisis, which is going to be either amping up, bolstering, arousing, or revving up medical college enrollments and expanding physician training programs right there, we would definitely not say arousing. We also wouldn't say revving up, and we also wouldn't say amping up. Why? Pretty much for the same reasons as in 24, where we want to make sure we're maintaining that academic tone. Now, if we're going to maintain an academic tone, we want to say the word bolstering. Okay, that's providing the correct meaning, and it also maintains that academic tone, like I said. Okay, bolstering medical college enrollments means that we are going to increase the medical college enrollments. Arousing, revving up, and amping up aren't as clear there, and they also don't maintain that tone. All right, it's too slow and costly to address the near-term problem. Alternatives are being explored. One promising avenue has been a greater reliance on physician assistants, otherwise known as PAs. Okay, now we can go back and we can answer question 23. We see that we're talking about how we're going to have shortages with physicians, right? Seeing doctors then would become more difficult. So let's go ahead and answer number 23. So we have option A, the term paramedics refers to healthcare workers who provide routine and clinical services. No. B, for many Americans, finding a physician is likely to become a growing challenge. Yes. Why? Because we're going to face these shortages of physicians. Okay, so the B makes perfect sense to introduce this passage. Option C, getting treatment for an illness usually requires seeing a general practitioner or a specialist. That's not directly related to what this paragraph and what this passage is about. Option D, worldwide the costs of healthcare are increasing at an alarming rate. We're not really concerned about costs here. We're concerned about the number of physicians. All right, moving on. 26, the writer is considering adding the sentence. Several factors are you in favor of such an expanded role. Keep in mind that we need to make sure it transitions from our previous paragraph and also supports the main point of this next paragraph. So we have, by virtue of their medical training, PAs, okay, our subjects PAs, that's plural, therefore we have to have the correct version of their, which would be THEIR. So our answer there is going to be C. Going back up, PAs can perform many of the jobs traditionally done by doctors, including treating chronic and acute conditions, performing minor surgeries, and prescribing some medications. Keep in mind this is a list of 3 things. We're going to separate that list of 3 with a comma before and there. So this is just simply having the correct punctuation for our list. So our answer there would be answer choice D. Moving on. However, although well compensated, earning in 2012 median annual salary of $90,930, PAs cost healthcare providers less than do physicians. Keep in mind that what we have here is we have 2 things going on in number 29. We have a non-essential phrase or clause, and we also have an introductory modifying phrase. Well, let's go ahead and identify each aspect of this. So we have an introductory modifying phrase of although well compensated. Keep in mind if you have an introductory modifying phrase, you're going to have a comma after that. But we also have then, I'll go ahead and highlight this in yellow, we also have a non-essential phrase or clause in earning in 2012 a median annual salary of $90,930. Now we know with a non-essential phrase or clause we can use 2 commas, we could use 2 parentheses, or we could use 2 em dashes to offset it. But because we have to have a comma at the end or after our introductory modifying phrase or clause, we know that we're going to have to end up having a comma before PAs to identify that we have an introductory modifying phrase. Now, because of that, we can't use commas then to offset this non-essential phrase or clause. Em dashes wouldn't look good either, because if we have an em dash and then a comma, you don't want to do that. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to place the non-essential phrase or clause in parentheses, and then we're going to have a comma after those parentheses, okay? So our answer here will be answer choice B. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. We're going to end up putting that comma because we have the introductory modifying phrase. It goes after that non-essential phrase or clause, which is offset with parentheses. All right, let's keep reading then. PAs cost healthcare providers less than do the physicians who might otherwise undertake these tasks. Moreover, the training period for PAs is markedly shorter than something physicians. Keep in mind what we're comparing here is the training period for PAs. We have to compare that then to the training period for physicians. Okay, or whenever you're comparing 2 things, you have to make sure you're comparing the correct 2 things. So in this case, I'll go ahead and highlight this. We're comparing the training period for PAs. It has to be the training period for physicians. Now keep in mind, we don't have to restate training period as long as we just go ahead and indicate we're referring to that with that. Why is it that and not those? Well, the reason that it's that is because training period is singular. Okay, keep in mind we ignore for PAs because that's a prepositional phrase that is describing the training period. The training period is singular, therefore we have to have that for physicians. Why is it not that compared with? Well, we're already comparing it by saying it's markedly shorter. Okay, so we can go ahead and get rid of B. We know A has those, which is incorrect. And we can't say delete the underlined portion because we have to include the word that for, because that tells us we're referring to the training period. All right, and then going back up now, we can go ahead and answer question number 26, right? So the writer is considering adding the following sentence. Several factors are you in such an expanded role? Should the writer make this addition here? Well, we see that it's doing a couple things, right? First, it's introducing the topic that we're discussing throughout this paragraph, right? And that's talking about how there are multiple factors that are arguing in favor of PAs doing jobs that have been normally associated with physicians. It's also doing a great job of transitioning from our previous paragraph where we talk about this increased reliance on PAs. So should we add this here? Yes. Okay, why? Well, it's not because it's introducing a counter argument, but it's framing the points that the paragraph are going to examine. Okay, we see that throughout this paragraph we're discussing the reasons that PAs should have an expanded role. All right, moving on, we got question number 31 now. So let's go ahead and read down to there. We have physician assistants already offer vital primary care in many locations. Some 90,000 PAs were employed nationwide in 2012. Over and above their value and partially compensated for the general physician shortage has been their extraordinary contribution to rural healthcare. A recent review of the scholarly literature by Texas researchers found that PAs lend cost-efficient, widely appreciated services in other areas. Now we got to make a transition. So we have to read on. Rural-based PAs often provide a broader spectrum of such services than do their urban and suburban counterparts, possibly a consequence of the limited pool of rural-based physicians. Well, what are we seeing there? We know in our previous sentence, we're talking about An advantage of the PAs, right? They're lending cost-efficient, widely appreciated services in underserved areas. That's an advantage. Next thing we see, we're providing another advantage, right? Rural-based PAs offer a broader spectrum of services than do urban and suburban counterparts. So we see we have two advantages, thus we would say in addition, okay, to show that we are adding on to that point we made previously. So we could say thus, but it's not. The reason we don't say thus is because it's obviously not coming as a result of what came before it. We wouldn't say despite this. We wouldn't say on the other hand. We are showing something that's in addition to something else. All right, moving on to 32. Writers considering adding the following sentence. Let's go ahead and read down to there. So we have increasingly PAs and other medical practitioners have become a critical component. Two physicians, a 2013 RAND Corporation report estimates that while the number of primary care physicians will increase slowly from 2010 to 2025, the number of physician assistants and nurse practitioners in primary care will grow at much faster rates. All right, now answering number 32, we're told the writer is considering adding the following sentence. Should the writer make the addition here? Sentence says, in fact, according to the data presented in the table, physician assistants will likely outnumber physicians by 2025. Well, first thing we want to do is check if it's accurate. Okay, so PAs versus physicians in 2025. So that's going to be in this column here. Okay, now we can go ahead and take a look at physicians. We see physicians will be 216,000 and PAs will only be 42,000. So this statement will be incorrect. Okay, physician assistants will not likely outnumber physicians by 2025. Should we make the addition? No. Why? It's not accurate interpretation of the data. Answer choice C. All right, and then we have both by merit and from necessity. PAs are likely to greet more patients. You should recognize this is the wrong patients. Okay, the correct form of patients would be what I just wrote right there, PATIENTS. Okay, the other form of patients, which is in answer choices A and B, would mean being able to wait for an extended period of time. Also, we have to recognize that we need to have the correct form of than. Okay, since we're making a comparison, we would use THAN. So our answer there will be D. Okay, moving on to the next passage. We got gold into silver, the reverse alchemy of superhero comic books. We're asked right off the bat for which choice effectively is going to combine these underlined sentences. When answering a question like this, what we're going to do is start with the shortest answer choice first. We see all of these are really roughly the same length, so this probably won't make a big difference here as far as saving us time, but we can go ahead and follow the strategy anyways. So we'll start with number one. We have just as popular film franchises are often rebooted in an effort to make their characters and stories fresh and relevant for new audiences, superhero comic books are periodically reworked to try to increase their appeal to contemporary readers. Okay, nothing wordy there. Everything's efficient. Everything's concise. No repetition. No redundancy. Everything's grammatically correct. So it looks like B will be my correct answer there. I will also show you why A, C, and D are incorrect here, though, just to make sure that you understand why incorrect answers are incorrect as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at C. So we have superhero comic books are periodically reworked to try to increase their appeal to contemporary readers. While popular film franchises are often rebooted in an effort to make their characters and stories fresh and relevant for new audience. Big issue here, I'll go ahead and highlight this in yellow, is that we're using well here. Okay, we want to show that these two things are similar. When we use the word well, we're not showing that these two things are similar, therefore C is incorrect. Looking at D, superhero comic books are much like popular film franchises and being often rebooted in an effort to make their characters and stories fresh and relevant for new audiences and periodically reworked to try to increase their appeal to contemporary readers. What you should recognize here is that we have a lot of confusion because we're starting out with superhero comic books, comparing them immediately to film franchises, but what we're not doing is we're not making a comparison of the rebooting and of the reworking, which makes this whole answer choice very confusing because it's unclear, which part's being referred to on the comic books and what part is referring to the film franchises. So that's why D is incorrect. There's a lot of confusion there. And then if we take a look at answer choice A, we have in an effort to make their characters and stories fresh and relevant for new audiences. Popular film franchises are often rebooted, are similar to superhero comic books, which are periodically reworked to try to increase their appeal to contemporary readers. Now, the big issue here is that we have a non-essential phrase or clause, which is actually not non-essential. Okay, this is completely necessary to the meaning of the sentence. Therefore, answer choice A is wrong. Also, answer choice A, fairly wordy. It could be condensed down as well. All right, let's go ahead and move on to number 35 now. This practice is almost as, so we got the options of elderly, old, mature, or geriatric as the medium itself and has in large part established the ages that compose comic book history. Keep in mind, we want to make sure that we are both having the correct meaning in this sentence, but also that we have the correct tone. We wouldn't describe the practice of rebooting comic books as elderly. We wouldn't describe it as mature, and we wouldn't describe it as geriatric. We want to describe this process as old, right? It's almost as old as the medium itself. All right, moving on, we've got number 36. We have the shift from the golden to the silver age is probably the most successful example of publishers responding to changing times and tastes. There's no need for any punctuation there. We're not splitting up any sort of dependent clause from an independent clause or splitting up two independent clauses, anything like that. So we know our answer there is going to be D, okay? They're just trying to throw you off by throwing in random punctuation. Recognize that you don't need to have any sort of punctuation there. All right, moving on, we got the start of the first golden age of comic books is often dated to 1938 with the debut of Superman in Action Comics 1. Besides beginning the age, Superman in many respects defined it, becoming the model on which many later superheroes were based. His characterization, as established in Superman 1, 1939, was relatively simple. He could hurdle skyscrapers and leap an eighth of a mile, run faster than a streamlined train, withstand anything less than a bursting shell, and lift a car over his head. Now, at this point, we're asked for which choice is most consistent with the previous examples. We see that that's going to be no change. Why? Because it's showing that same sort of superhero characteristics as far as superpowers, right? If we take a look at B through D, none of them show that. We have B, hold down a regular job. That's not consistent with the previous examples. C, wear a bright blue costume with a flowing red cape. No, we want to focus on those superhuman abilities. And then we have D, live in the big city metropolis instead of a small town where he grew up, also not showing that superhuman capability. All right, sent to Earth from the doomed planet Krypton, he was raised by human foster parents whose love helped infuse him with an unapologetic desire to benefit mankind. Admirable but aloof, the Golden Age Superman was arguably more paragon than character, a problem only partially solved by giving him a human alter ego. Other Golden Age superheroes were similarly archetypal. Batman was a crime-fighting millionaire, Wonder Woman a warrior princess from a mythical island. By contrast, the Silver Age of comics was marked by characters that, though somewhat simplistic by today's standards, and now we're asked for what most effectively sets up the main idea of the following two sentences, which means we have to read on. We have, in addition to supervillains, the new, soon-to-be iconic characters of the age, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and the Hulk among them. Keep in mind, I see I have a non-essential phrase or clause indicated by this M dash and also the punctuation here. In order to make those match, I have to have another M dash, therefore answer choice D. Had to cope with mundane, real-life problems, including paying the rent, dealing with family squabbles, and facing anger, loneliness, and ostracism. So ultimately, we're showing that these are more similar to humans than the previous era's counterpart, right? The Golden Age's counterparts. All right, so now if we're going to pick our answer choice for 38, what's effectively setting up that idea? We have option A, we're provided with origin stories often involving scientific experiments gone wrong. No, we want to show they're more similar to humans. B, reflected increasing conservatism in the U.S. in the 1950s. No, we want to show that they're more similar to humans. And then C, engaged in bizarre adventures frequently inspired by science fiction. No. And then D, were more realistic than their Golden Age counterparts, right? More realistic or more relatable on a human aspect, right? More similar to humans. Okay, so then we got answer choice D for 38. We've answered 39. We're moving on to 40 now. All right, their interior lives are richer and more and their motivations more complex. Although sales remained strong for Golden Age stalwarts Superman and to a lesser extent Batman, now we have the writer wants a conclusion to the sentence and paragraph that logically completes the discussion of the Silver Age and provides an effective transition into the next paragraph. Well, if we want to provide effective transition into the next paragraph, we have to get a better idea of what that's about. So let's go ahead and go down here. More transformations would take place in the medium as the Silver Age gave way to the Bronze and modern and possibly postmodern ages. Such efforts have yielded diminishing returns as even the complete relaunch. Okay, so question number 41, what we're ultimately dealing with is tense here. What we have to recognize is these efforts yielding diminishing returns. This has both occurred in the past, right? Since obviously this transition occurred in the past, but this transition to the possibly postmodern age is still occurring. Okay, so we need something that indicates something happened in the past and is still occurring. That means that what we're going to end up using then is the present perfect tense, which is going to be have yielded. Now, keep in mind that the present perfect tense, if you're not familiar with that, that just means that something began in the past and is still ongoing. Okay, so the way that we would represent that in this case would be with have yielded. All right, moving on, we have as even the complete relaunch of DC Comics superheroes. Keep in mind, superheroes doesn't own anything, therefore I can get rid of A, B, and C, and I see my answer there will be D. Line in 2011 failed to arrest the steep two-gated decline of comic book sales. At this point, I feel like we can come back up to number 40 and answer this, right? So we got to conclude the discussion of the Silver Age and provide an effective transition to this next paragraph talking about more of these eras that came after the Silver Age, right? So to take a look at option A, we have subsequent decades would show the enduring appeal of these characters. That's not closing off the Silver Age, so that's why A is wrong. B, the distinctions between later stages of comic book history are less well defined than the one between the Golden and Silver Ages. That's also not indicating a conclusion of the Silver Age. And then we have option C, readers increasingly gravitated to the upstarts of the 1960s, which are discussed in that next paragraph, and the Silver Age drew to a close. That's showing both that completion of the discussion of the Silver Age, which is talked about in the prompt, and then also transitioning into that next paragraph, which is the upstarts of the 1960s. So C will be our correct answer there. If we take a look at D, we have these characters themselves underwent significant change over the course of the Silver Age. That's not introducing that next paragraph. It's also not closing out the discussion of the Silver Age. All right, 43. For both commercial and arguably creative reasons, comma, then, or however, or nevertheless, or yet, no transition was more successful than, that has to be that from the transition than that from the Golden to Silver Age. How do I know it has to be that and not those? Well, I know I'm referring to the transition, right? Then that transition from the golden into silver age. Transition is singular, therefore I have to have singular that. Can't be these, can't be those. Those are both plural. Have to have that. Can't delete the underlined portion because then that's not telling us that we're comparing that transition, and we have to show that we are comparing that transition. Therefore, our answer for 44 will be C. Answering 43 now, right? Ultimately, what we're doing in this transition is showing that something is causal, right? We're not indicating a contrast. We can get rid of however. We can get rid of yet because we're not, indicating any sort of shift. What we're showing is something that's causal, okay? So we can't use nevertheless. We're showing that for both commercial and creative reasons, then, right, because of that, no transition was more successful than that from the golden and silver age. So our answer for 43 would be A. Hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, make sure to like and subscribe. In addition to that, if you're looking to donate or if you're looking for my website where I offer private SAT prep, college essay brainstorming, and college essay editing, then be sure to check out the links in the description.